When we reviewed the Legion 5 Pro back in May, we thought that it was an incredible machine. So we obviously jumped at the chance of reviewing its older sibling, the Lenovo Legion 7. Now, side by side, or even looking at their spec sheets, you would be hard-pressed to tell these two apart, since they share so many components. However, the Legion 7, despite having its higher model number, is actually a little bit more expensive than the Legion 5 Pro. And that's mostly due to some extra features that they've added to the aesthetics and a few improvements to the build quality. So the real question is it worth it? Well, let's take a look at today's video sponsor and then come back to it and answer that question.
Oh yeah, that's the stuff. The new Lenovo Unifan AL120 daisy chained to each other for simplified installation and handling, connected by a single cable exit for clean cable management, with beautiful blade interior and exterior ARGB illumination on both black and white models that are fully controllable through the software for RPM and all the cool looking effects. Check out the Unifan AL120 down below.
All right, so before I get into pricing, I do want to talk about availability, because at the time of making this video, both in Canada and in the United States official website, a lot of the Legion laptops, including the 5 Pro, are temporarily unavailable. I'm pretty sure this could be a bug, or they could have some serious trouble meeting demand, so I hope that changes very soon. Now, on to pricing, and it starts at $1,800. And for that, you get a Ryzen 7 5800H, 16 GB of RAM, half a terabyte of storage, and an RTX 3060 GPU. Oddly, they're only offering this SKU on their website, but on their spec sheet, they say that they offer a Ryzen 9 CPU with an RTX 3070 and 3080 variants with up to 165 watts of TGP. The issue is actually finding one, and I have no idea what pricing is for those models, so if you happen to find one, you get free internet points. I should also mention that unlike a lot of other companies, Legion is actually not trying to limit its lower-end GPU. It almost has the same TGP as the RTX 3070 found on the 5 Pro, which is 140 watts. This one is 130 watts, but we'll get into the performance a bit later in the video. Now, taking a look at the design, I really like what Legion has done with the 7. You get this beautiful storm gray finish with the Legion logo tucked away at the corner. Interestingly, it does a better job at resisting fingerprints compared to the Slim 7 that I checked out recently. The Y logo is backlit and it supports RGB, but you can turn that off easily through the shortcuts to maintain that consistent and clean look across the board. The entire chassis is made out of aluminum and magnesium alloy, and overall build quality is superb. I had no issues with creaking, especially with the hinge that I experienced on last year's 7i, so that's definitely good news. Now, speaking of the hinge, it actually is very stiff and there's barely any wobble, so that's certainly an improvement compared to the 7i and definitely the Slim 7, which definitely had a wobbly screen. As for size, believe it or not, the Legion 7 is actually a little bit smaller than the Legion 5 Pro, and it's also thinner too, coming in at 0.93 inches versus 1.1 inches, or 23.5 millimeters versus 26.85 millimeters, for those of you who want metrics, and they weigh about the same. Now, just like the 5 Pro, I wouldn't classify this thing as a super thin high-performance gaming laptop. It's actually quite chunky, and you can feel that when you pick this thing up, so you'll definitely need to make room in your backpack, and also, not to mention, the power brick that Legion includes with these laptops, especially with the Legion 7 and the 5 Pro, is ginormous. I mean, it wouldn't even fit a fanny pack. Actually, coming to think of it, nobody really puts power adapters inside fanny packs, so yeah. But hey, at least you get the idea. So from a portability standpoint, those two things are certainly something to take note of. Now, the interior space is nothing too different compared to the other Legion laptops. You get a full-size keyboard, which has the same gray aesthetic as the rest of the chassis. Personally, I like the black on gray contrast on the 5 Pro. Another thing I noticed is that this laptop doesn't feature a fingerprint reader like the Legion Slim 7, which is a bit disappointing considering the price premium. You still get the quick shortcuts within the function keys to adjust the performance profiles, the refresh rate for the display, the rear LEDs for the connectors, and also you can also cycle between different lighting effects using the function and spacebar keys. So everything that is normally there within other Legion laptops are still here. The keys themselves are great. Lenovo's True Strike mechanism offers adequate amount of travel distance and smooth feedback when you type on them. But perhaps the biggest addition or upgrade to the Legion 7 is this beautiful RGB lighting system. So you get this cool underglow light strip beneath the palm rest, and it looks beautiful with perfect diffusion, and it's pretty consistent. I can certainly tell that it's brighter than the 7i that I reviewed last year. Now, obviously with Legion laptops, expect Corsair's IQ software, which does have its own set of issues, but at the same time, you can actually do a lot of cool things with this software. For instance, you can custom set your zones to the color of your choice, and also the individual keys as well. You can actually turn off the lighting for the vents, like what I did over here, which is the setting that I like, but basically you can go all out with customization and set it to your preference, and I really like the flexibility with this software. The trackpad is pretty good. It's a glass surface, but just like I mentioned on my Slim 7 video, it doesn't feel as smooth or comfortable as the G14 or the Blade series from Razer, but it's still pretty big, and I didn't notice any metallic cling that I did with the Slim 7, so that's nice. But I did wish if the primary left and right buttons had a little bit more travel distance or a little bit more throw, just because it still feels a little too stiff. This is the webcam test on the Legion 7. The quality is pretty much on par with the Legion 5 Pro and the Slim 7. My skin doesn't look overexposed, and the microphone sounds really, really good. So this should do a pretty good job when it comes to conference calls, and if you want to use it for streaming and stuff like that, this will do a pretty good job for a portable setup. There's also a dedicated webcam shutter switch on the side, which disables the webcam from the device manager, so that's an added layer of security for those of you who value privacy. Now, the speakers are positioned at the bottom, and they sound average. It's not something that I would use for serious music listening because the bass response is, it's all right. It's not the best. So you're actually much better off using a good pair of headphones. Taking a look at the I/O, and this laptop is very generous in that area. As you probably are aware of most Legion laptops, they're located at the back. So you have power in, USB 3.2 Gen 2 port with DisplayPort pass-through and PD charging up to 100 watts. A couple of USB Type-A Gen 2 ports, HDMI 2.1, and an Ethernet jack. Switching over to the right-hand side, there's a single USB Type-C Gen 1 port, and on the left-hand side, another Gen 2 Type-C port with DisplayPort support and an audio jack. Interestingly, the 7 is missing a full-size SD card reader, and I find that quite odd because the Slim 7 features that, and it's a slimmer version of this laptop. So I'm not sure why Legion did that. Shifting gears to the display, and you're greeted with a beautiful 16:10 Quad HD Plus IPS screen with a refresh rate of 165 Hz. And the color gamut is pretty respectable, as it shares the same numbers as the 5 Pro and the Slim 7. As you can see, it covers 100% sRGB, 78% Adobe RGB, and 79% DCI-P3. It's not the best out there, but this will do an amazing job at any task you throw at it. Also, the brightness levels are exceptional. My sample went as far as 550 nits, which is a bit dimmer than the 5 Pro, but I'm not complaining because it's still great for outdoor use, and the gaming experience is amazing since you do get G-Sync support, but you have to make sure that you directly run the display off of the RTX 3060, and that can be done through NVIDIA's control panel. Upgradability is pretty straightforward on the Legion 7, so once you get under the hood, you have instant access to 2 RAM slots. Maximum supported memory is 32 GB. The primary NVMe SSD is right over here, and the drive speeds are in line with the Legion 5 Pro. The read performance is over 3 GB per second, and writes are around 2.8 GB per second. It's not as fast as some of the Gen 4 drives that we're seeing on Intel's 11th gen laptops, but it's still very fast. Okay, so moving on to battery life, there's a few things to mention here. First of all, Legion never really stuffed their 15-inch gaming laptops with the biggest possible battery like Asus does. But 80 watt-hours isn't exactly small either. And thanks to the efficiency of the Ryzen mobile processor, we were able to get almost, but not quite, 9 hours of battery life in our light load tests in balance mode. In quiet mode, you could expect this laptop to touch the 12-hour mark. After seeing the light load results, we weren't expecting any miracles in our heavy load test. But the 7 actually did better than expected. It could be due to the lower wattage RTX 3060 helping because it outlasted the otherwise identically spec'd Legion 5 Pro by a good 30%, and that laptop used an RTX 3070. Now, we've been fans of Legion's laptop power plants for a while, and the reason for that is simply because they're very easy to get to. So when you look at the performance profiles, you have performance, balanced, and quiet, which can all be controlled through the Vantage software, along with the switchable graphics, display overdrive, and a few other things. But with the Legion 7, the balance mode punched way above its weight class by having higher wattage levels than the performance mode, but only for about 2.5 minutes. And then it smoothly transitioned to a lower level of about 74 watts. performance just carries along at a constant 81 watts. But either way, both of those power levels are really quite high compared to some other AMD laptops we've seen. The quiet mode has pretty decent peak power levels for about 20 seconds, kind of in line with the processor's turbo boost, but then it falls to a steady 20 watts for the rest of the test. Now moving on to CPU temperatures, and in performance mode, the CPU temperature crept up to a little over 95 degrees Celsius, which is pretty typical for any laptop CPU in its highest power mode. When you look at balanced mode, on the other hand, well, it hits a pretty beautiful sub 70 degrees Celsius temperature mark after the initial 2.5-minute power spike that we saw a few seconds ago. Quiet mode does what it promises, and as usually, it gives a quiet computing experience without sacrificing temperatures. Now, it's really nice to see how controlled and consistent these temperatures are. They don't fluctuate wildly due to fans spinning up and down, because Lenovo's engineers did a really nice job of properly designing and tuning their cooling solutions. Now, when it comes to actual core clocks, the performance mode ended up being really impressive, keeping the 5800H at about 4 GHz for the whole Maya run. That's closer to the CPU's 4.4 GHz max boost clock than its 3.2 GHz base clock. So again, very, very impressive. The balanced mode peaked at 3.8 GHz, dipped down a little over 3.6 GHz until the 2.5-minute mark, and then it gradually slid down to about 3.4 GHz. That's a fair bit slower than performance mode, but you're rewarded with lower overall temperatures and less fan noise too. Quiet mode has the greatest variations, with a brief spike to 3.2 GHz and then a drop down to 2.4 GHz, which, to be honest, still provides great web browsing and light productivity performance. So now about noise. Well, I've got to say, both quiet and balanced are some of the best I've seen given their overall clock speeds and temperatures. Meanwhile, performance does step things up a notch. Now, it doesn't run the fans at full speed, so it isn't screaming loud, but this is also a setting that I wouldn't want to use without headphones on. It's also good to see the exterior temperatures well managed. There aren't any hotspots that would be too worrying even with the laptop under full load. Honestly though, this is one area that Legion always excels, so anything less than perfection here would have been a little disappointing. Now, before jumping into performance results, I do need to talk about memory because it's been a hot topic in our comment section lately. I think it's because it could either be to save money or because there's a shortage of high quality DDR4 memory at the moment. And let's be honest, why wouldn't there be a shortage of DDR4 just to combine with every other, shortages out there? You see, Legion outfitted this laptop with some slow memory. And no, not slow in the sense of frequency, since this is actually still rated at DDR4 3200, but it's actually with the secondary timings because they're quite bad. Now, let me explain. So in these screenshots, you'll see the kit on the left is what's installed into the Legion 7, and on the right is a standard kit of Crucial's 3200 MHz that we bought about a year ago now. As you drill down into the secondary timings, you'll see the default modules have really loose timings. They're not the only company doing this. We and others saw the same thing with the Asus Strix G15 Advantage Edition, and recently with some other Intel-based laptops as well. Now, obviously, the performance takes a gigantic hit, but it's still a shame because there's additional performance left on the table. But anyways, I just wanted to bring this up before drilling down into the actual performance. So let's take a look at that. Starting things off with Cinebench, there's really no surprises here since all of these Ryzen 5000 mobile chips are running at roughly the same 72 to 80 watt power levels. The more power you pump into them, the better they perform. Of course, provided temperatures are kept in check. Since the Legion 7 hits both those points in its performance mode, it sticks ahead of the Slim 7 and pretty much ties with the 5 Pro, which rocks the same CPU operating at the same TDP levels. In Premiere Pro, the Legion 7 comes in dead last. But that's not surprising since it does have the weakest GPU in this lineup, and our Premiere test relies heavily on GPU acceleration. So if you need more rendering performance, just grab one of the higher-end models. It does a little better in Resolve, but unsurprisingly is outdone by the more expensive laptops with RTX 3080s and that Intel-based ORS 15P, which also has a 3080, though one operating at lower power levels, so just keep that in mind. While the RTX 3060 might not be the highest-end GPU in the mobile RTX 30 series lineup, Legion is definitely not trying to hold it back at all. In both the performance and balance modes, we saw wattages of over 120 watts, which is way above average for that GPU, and it means that we should see solid performance in the gaming benchmarks. Quiet mode is interesting because the GPU power is basically doing the opposite of what the CPU did. If you remember the earlier chart, in quiet mode, the CPU had higher power levels for about 20 seconds, and then they decreased. And here, the GPU has lower power levels for about 20 seconds, and then they boost up. Why? Well, that's because Legion's only allowing one of those two components to run at a certain temperature at a time. That's so that heat doesn't overwhelm the cooling system while its fans are spinning slowly. Now, this is a really impressive chart. Okay, maybe it's just me, but no matter the power mode that you pump in, the GPU temperatures just barely broke the 70-degree mark. Usually 85 degrees is the maximum, and even the best struggle to hit below 75. I'm guessing this extra cooling capacity is there to properly take care of the hotter running RTX 3070 and 3080 GPUs. The great thing about low GPU temps is that it means high potential GPU clocks, and that's what we see here as well. Technically, the RTX 3060 Mobile has a base clock of 1387 MHz and a boost of 1702 MHz. So the fact that it's running at just under 1900 MHz in both balanced and performance mode is really impressive. Even in quiet mode, the GPU frequency was bouncing between 1500 and 1600 MHz. So you should still have a pretty solid gaming performance as long as you're not playing a particularly CPU-intensive game. Given that it has the lowest end GPU in this lineup, it's no surprise that the Legion 7 generally comes into the lower part of the charts. However, it does do quite well in more CPU-intensive games like CSGO, and also occasionally achieves better 1% lows than some of the other higher-end but lower wattage GPUs. But I also want to mention again that with the 5 Pro, you get the 3070 for about the same amount, and that's something you absolutely need to remember. It's more performance for the same price and a few small aesthetic changes. Now sure, that might change as Legion puts these things on sale, but it's really hard to deny how good the Pro really is. Moving on to our 1440p and 1600p results, and I'm saying both here because the Legion 7 and the Legion 5 Pro have 2560 by 1600p Quad HD Plus displays, while all the others are running at 1440p. Theoretically, that puts the Legion 7 at 11% disadvantage compared to the 1440p models. And that's obviously not great since it already has one of the weakest GPUs here. So aside from a few games, the Legion 7 plays closer to the back of the pack, and sometimes by a lot in most GPU-intensive games. However, looking at the Legion 5 Pro's numbers, I'd be tempted to jump over that model with its more powerful RTX 3070, especially right now given how close they are in price. It's almost a no-brainer unless you absolutely need to have the slightly different look of the 7. I guess this is also what happens when a laptop lineup gets a bit too big. There's always going to be a crossover, guys. So I think it's time to conclude my thoughts on the Lenovo Legion 7. Now, this is a very interesting laptop because it shares a lot of things with the Legion 5 Pro, and I've mentioned that numerous times in this video. And from a price perspective, it certainly looks like the 5 Pro takes the crown because you get more power and performance compared to the 7. The only reason to upgrade to the 7 is because of the aesthetics and this cool RGB lighting goodness and other things, and of course a much improved build quality compared to the Legion 5, and that's about it. Now, if you don't find those things too attractive, I would still steer your way towards the Legion 5 Pro simply because I still think it offers an amazing value, provided you can actually find one right now, because it's a joke that you can't actually buy these at the moment. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you were able to take away everything that you needed to know about the Legion 7. Let us know what you guys think about the entire Legion lineup, and if you're looking to pick up, or if you're debating between choosing the Legion 5 Pro and the Legion 7, which one would be your pick and why? Curious to hear your thoughts. I'm Iber with Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Oh, and definitely spend responsibly.